The cat had been sitting at the corner of Aldersgate and Main for 9 days. Nobody knew why. That was the part Elowen couldn't stop thinking about. He was not thin. He was not performing hunger. He did not follow anyone. He simply occupied that corner, the cracked concrete strip between the hardware store's iron step and the first oak tree on Main Street, and he sat there with the particular authority of something that has chosen its position carefully and has no intention of moving until its business is concluded. He faced southeast toward the ridge. Every morning when Elowen opened the shutters of her workshop, there he was. Every evening when she latched them, he was still there, or was back there. She could not tell which. She had not yet decided whether the distinction mattered. He was not a beautiful animal. She would not have said that, even to be kind. His fur had the color of old ash, a gray without warmth, and the texture of it was uneven in ways that suggested old damage, patches where the coat lay flat and dull against his skin, patches where it stood up coarse and short, as though the hair had grown back in a hurry over something it would rather forget. One of his ears was torn along the top, the edge healed but notched, like a page that had been folded and never smoothed flat again. His left eye was half closed, the lid pulled down and fixed there by a scar that ran from the outer corner toward his jaw, a thick pale seam that left the eye permanently narrowed, an expression that read to most people as either suspicion or disdain, depending on how they chose to interpret it. The residents of Oakhaven were not, as a rule, a community that withheld interpretation. "That thing gives me the creeps," said Loretta Duff at the post office, to no one in particular and everyone within earshot. "One eye half shut like that. You know it's sick." "It's a stray," said Ray Purvis, who knew about strays the way people know about things they have decided to have opinions on without investigating. "No telling where it's been." On the 5th day, someone had thrown a paper cup of cold coffee at the corner, and the cat had simply stood, shaken one front paw, and sat back down in the same position, 3 inches to the left of the coffee stain. On the 7th day, Gerald Moss from the hardware store had called animal control. The officer who came looked at the cat, looked at his paperwork, and informed Gerald that a healthy cat sitting on public property was not technically an actionable situation. Gerald had said some things about what was or was not technically actionable. The officer had driven away. Elowen had watched all of this from her workshop window. The workshop was the bottom floor of a narrow building on Aldersgate, a building that had started its life as a tack room attached to a stable that no longer existed and had evolved over a century and a half through a succession of uses: seed storage, a printing shop, a briefly disastrous florist, until it came to rest as the workspace of Elowen Marsh, furniture restorer. She had run the shop for 31 years. She was 70 years old, and she had the forearms of a woman 20 years younger and the eyes of a woman 10 years older, which was the trade the work had required, and she had made it without complaint. The eyes were the part she thought about now. The cataract in her right eye had been diagnosed 14 months ago. The left would follow, her doctor had told her, in its own time. A phrase she found professionally unsatisfying, given that her work lived entirely in the details. She could still read a grain line, still match a stain within 2 shades of accuracy, still see, by the angle of the morning light through her east-facing windows, whether a joint was flush or off by a 1/4 inch. But the morning light was different than it had been, softer at the edges, like trying to focus on something through a very thin cloth. She had told no one this. The bureau was part of the problem, or rather, the bureau was the problem made physical, given a weight and a set of dimensions she could not ignore. It stood in the back corner of the workshop, half finished, covered by a drop cloth that she had not lifted in 6 weeks. It was a secretary desk from 1793, American Federal period, cherry and satinwood with inlaid stringing that would have required the original maker weeks of patient, furious attention. The museum in Richmond had been waiting for it since August. The director had called twice. Elowen had said each time that she was being thorough. This was not untrue. She was being thorough in her avoidance. The inlay on the fallboard, the writing surface that folded down, was cracked, not badly. A hairline fissure running through the satinwood banding, something that could be addressed, that she had addressed on similar pieces before, but that required the kind of close, sustained, close-range focus that her right eye could no longer reliably provide. She had not told the museum. She had not told herself entirely. She had simply put the drop cloth over it and found other work to occupy the bench. She was a woman who had always finished what she started. The bureau was unfinished. These were two facts she had not yet found a way to put in the same room together. This Beaupré. On the 9th morning, she went outside. She told herself she was going to check the weather, which was a reasonable thing to do in early October in the Shenandoah Valley, where the sky could shift from clear to wet in the time it took to walk from one end of town to the other. She told herself she was going to the post office for a parcel that Denny had left a slip about on Tuesday. Both of these things were true. She went out the front door, turned left on Aldersgate, and did not cross to the post office. She stood 6 feet from the corner and looked at the cat. The cat looked back at her with his good eye. His right eye was clear, a yellow-green color she had not expected, clean and specific, the eye of an animal that noticed things. His half-closed left eye gave him, at this distance, an expression that she had now decided was not suspicion or disdain, but concentration. The look of something working through a problem. "You're a mess," she said. Her voice was matter-of-fact. She did not use it on animals differently than she used it on people, which was without unnecessary softness. The cat's tail moved once, a single sweep. "You're not going to get anywhere sitting there if that's what you're waiting for. This town doesn't warm up quickly." The cat blinked with his good eye and then turned to face southeast again, toward the ridge. She followed his gaze out of reflex. The ridge above Oakhaven was a long wooded slope that bracketed the east side of town, covered in hickory and oak that had already begun to turn, red at the tops, still green below, the color of a fire that has not yet decided how far it is going to go. The retention basin was up there somewhere, behind the tree line. Old infrastructure, built in the 50s, maintained intermittently, debated at every town council meeting for 20 years without resolution. She knew it the way everyone in Oakhaven knew it, a fact in the background, like a crack in a load-bearing wall that everyone agrees is probably fine. She looked at the cat, looking at the ridge. Something made her stay another moment. She could not have said what. "Well," she said finally, and went to the post office. The parcel was a set of hide glue she had ordered from a supplier in Baltimore, along with a sample card of satinwood veneer that she had requested, and she knew, carrying it back along Main Street, what the satinwood was for. She had ordered it without entirely deciding to. Her hands knew the work, apparently, even when the rest of her was still deciding. She was almost back to the workshop when she heard the sound. Not a cry, nothing distressed, more like a comment. A short, low sound from the corner, and she turned, and the cat was standing now, all 4 feet on the concrete, looking at her directly. Not at the ridge, at her. She stopped. He held her gaze for 3 seconds. Then he turned and walked, not running, not hesitating, around the corner of the hardware store and down the alley that ran alongside the building. He stopped at the far end of the alley and sat down again, looked back at her. Elowen stood on the sidewalk with her parcel of hide glue. "I'm not following a cat down an alley," she said. She went inside, but she stood at the workshop window for a long time afterward, looking at the corner where he had been. He was back the next morning, and the next. On the 12th day of his vigil at the corner, it rained. Not the dramatic rain of late summer, all sound and aggression, but the grey, settled rain of early fall. A rain that did not intend to stop, that came from the kind of sky that had made its decision and moved on from further conversation. By mid-morning, the streets were empty. By afternoon, even the hardware store had closed early. Elowen was at the bench, not working on the bureau, working on a set of Windsor chairs that needed recaning, when she heard the sound at the back door. Not scratching. A single, brief knock. The sound of something small and solid hitting wood. She set down the cane she was weaving and waited. It came again. She went to the back door, which opened onto the narrow, covered alley she used for deliveries, and opened it. The cat was there. He was wet, not dramatically. He had clearly found some shelter from the worst of it, but his fur was dark at the edges and flattened across his back, and rain was still running off the corrugated roof above him in a thin curtain. He did not perform distress. He did not shiver or cry. He sat on the threshold with the composure of someone who has been waiting in a line and has reached the front of it and would now like to proceed. He looked at her. "No," she said. He did not move. "I don't have cat food. I don't have a litter box. I haven't had an animal in this building in 15 years. He waited. The rain came off the roof in a curtain between them. She could see it beading on his fur, running in a thin trail along the scar from his eye to his jaw. "One night," she said, "until the rain stops." She stepped back. He walked in. He did not rush. He did not explore frantically. He walked into the workshop with the measured attention of someone taking inventory, moving along the walls, past the tool rack, past the Windsor chairs on their sawhorses, past the workbench with its ordered rows of chisels and gouges and the brass-handled burnishes she had bought 40 years ago, and still preferred to any modern version. He stopped at the drop cloth in the corner. He sat. He looked at it. "Don't," she said. He looked at her. He looked at the drop cloth. He looked at her again. "It's not ready," she said, which was not precisely what she meant, and she was aware of that, and she went back to the caning anyway. He slept that night on the mat inside the back door, his nose tucked under his own tail. In the morning, she found him sitting at the window, watching Aldersgate, watching the corner where he had been. She stood in the doorway with her coffee and watched him watch. "I'll get you some food," she said. "For today." He did not look at her. "I didn't name you," she added, which was also not precisely what she meant. She named him Balthazar. It came to her on the third day, while she was unfolding his food mat, a piece of cork she had cut from an old pinboard and lined with waxed paper, and she said it without planning to. "Balthazar." He turned from the window and looked at her, which meant nothing. Cats turned at sounds, but she felt a small, involuntary satisfaction anyway, the feeling of a fit that holds. He was not, it turned out, what she had expected. She had expected a damaged animal, skittish, flinching, the behavioral legacy of whatever had happened to his face and his fur. She had braced for the work of it, the slow acclimation, the overturned water bowl, the hissing from corners. Instead, Balthazar moved through the workshop with a calm that she could only describe as purposeful. He had preferences, and he made them known without drama. He did not sleep on the chaise cushion she set out for him. He slept on the mat. He did not drink from the bowl she placed near the window. He drank from the mason jar lid she used to catch drips from the corner shelf. He did not come when she called him, except when he chose to, which was often enough that she could not call it stubbornness. He had two habits that she noticed immediately. The first, he slept facing the back door, not the room, not the windows, the door. The second, every morning, regardless of the weather, he sat at the front window for exactly as long as it took Elowen to finish her first cup of coffee, and he watched the ridge. "Carte sir." It was Thatcher who noticed the cat first, from the street. Thatcher Doyle lived 4 doors up from Elowen's workshop, in the wide porched house that had been his family's for 3 generations, and he had been the county sheriff for 22 years before his hands had made the decision for him. He was 68, a quiet man, economical with words in the way that men who have spent decades in official roles sometimes become not cold but measured, each sentence edited internally before release. He walked every morning at 6, the same route, Main Street to Aldersgate, Aldersgate to the park back around. His doctor had said it was good for the tremor. He did not know if it was, but he walked. He had seen the cat at the corner during its 9-day vigil and had thought in passing what he always thought about strays. A stray was a situation in need of resolution, one way or the other. He had not assigned that resolution to himself. He had things he was managing. The tremor in his hands had been confirmed 3 months ago, not a surprise. He had watched it develop over 18 months, had felt the moment when a cup of coffee required 2 hands instead of 1, when his signature at the bottom of a document began to waver in a way that embarrassed him, had managed the embarrassment the way he managed most things, by pretending it did not exist until pretending was no longer an option. His doctor had given him a name for it, a medication for it, a prognosis that was careful and honest in the way that prognoses from good doctors always are, which is to say, it told him exactly enough to be useful and not so much that it became the only thing. He had told his daughter in Charlottesville. He had not told anyone in Oakhaven. On an October morning, 3 days after Balthazar moved into the workshop, Thatcher was passing on his morning walk when he saw the cat sitting at Elowen's front window. He stopped. The cat was looking at the ridge, and Thatcher, without particularly deciding to, looked at the ridge too. The trees up there had turned further overnight. The color had moved from the tops down toward the middle of the slope, and in the early light, the ridge had the particular amber of old honey, deep and saturated, beautiful in the way that things are beautiful when they are near the end of something. He stood there longer than he usually stood. He rang Elowen's bell. She opened the door with a wood chisel in her hand, which was typical, and looked at him. "You have a cat," he said. "Temporarily," she said. "He was at the corner for 9 days." "I know." "What changed?" "It rained." He looked at the cat, who had not turned from the window. "What's he looking at?" "The ridge," she said. "He does that every morning." Thatcher was quiet for a moment. "The old retention basin is up there." "I know." "Town's been arguing about that dam for 20 years. "I know that too." He looked at Balthazar for another moment. The cat's tail moved, a slow, deliberate sweep, left to right and back. Not agitation. Something else. "What's his name?" Thatcher asked. "Balthazar." He considered this. "Good name," he said, which was more than he would usually have offered, and walked on. 2 weeks passed. Oakhaven settled into October the way it always did. The azalea beds put to rest under their burlap wraps, the shop owners on Main Street switching their door signs from summer hours to fall hours, the smell of wood smoke beginning to appear in the mornings, layered under the damp leaf smell that was Shenandoah Valley autumn. A smell like old books and cold water, something that belonged to this specific piece of ground and no other. Elowen worked. She finished the Windsor chairs, delivered them, took payment, and went back to the workshop. She stood at the workbench for a long time one morning, and then she took the drop cloth off the bureau. Balthazar, who had been sleeping on the mat, came and sat beside it. He did not touch it. He sat close enough that she could feel the warmth of him when she bent to examine the fallboard, and he watched her hands, not the wood, her hands, the way a second pair of eyes might, the way someone watching someone else work might, with the particular attention of a witness. She ran one finger along the hairline crack in the satinwood banding. It was smaller than she had remembered, or perhaps her hands remembered it differently than her eyes did. She got the magnifying loupe from the drawer and fitted it to her good eye and bent close, and the crack was there, fine as a hair, and the satinwood around it was intact, the grain clean and uncompromised, the color still true. It would need consolidant, a fine application, and then the inlay would need to be pressed flat and held. Careful work, slow work, the kind of work her hands had done 100 times. She straightened and looked at the bureau for a long moment. "I'll need better light," she said. Balthazar turned and went back to his mat. She ordered a magnifying work lamp from Richmond and called the museum director and told him she would have the piece completed by December. He said he would not hold her to that date. She said he would not need to. The first real trouble came on a Friday. Elowen had left for the lumberyard early, and Balthazar was alone in the workshop, which he had been before without incident. She came back to find her entire stock of wool packing cloths, 10 of them, the heavy oatmeal-colored ones she used to pad pieces during transport, moved. Not scattered, not shredded, moved. They were gone from the packing shelf in the back room, and she found them, after a baffled circuit of the workshop, outside. Not in the alley. At the edge of the alley, where the gravel met the base of the slope that ran up toward the ridge, pushed or dragged into the cleft between 2 exposed roots of a large oak, stuffed there with the specific intention of something that fills a gap. She stood in the alley and looked at them. Then she looked up the slope. There was a seam in the ground, 6 feet up the slope from the oak roots. She could see it from where she stood, a thin, dark line in the earth, maybe 4 inches long, running across the slope at an angle. Even as she looked, a thin thread of water appeared at its edge and ran down the slope and disappeared into the gravel. She stood there for a long time. Then she went back inside. She took 3 of the remaining packing cloths and put them up the slope herself, pressing them into the seam, and the water slowed. It was not nothing, what she had done, but it was also not a solution. She did not know, standing there, what she was looking at. She thought, groundwater. She thought, this autumn has been very wet. She thought, the slope is saturated. These were all true things. She did not think, The dam. Not yet. She went back inside and found Balthazar sitting at the window, facing the ridge, his tail very still. She told Thatcher about the cloths on Saturday. He came to look at the slope himself, and they stood together at the base of it in the early morning grey, both of them looking at the dark seam in the earth. The thread of water was thicker now. It had cut a small channel in the gravel overnight, a thin groove running down to the alley. Thatcher crouched, which cost him. She could see it in the careful way he managed his hands as he balanced, and he looked at the water. "This is not normal groundwater," he said. "No," she said. "Has it rained enough this fall to explain this?" "More than enough." He stood, slowly. He looked up the slope toward the tree line. "I want to call someone," he said. "From the state, the division that handles infrastructure. The town council will say you're overreacting." "Probably," he said. "Sterling will say something specific and unpleasant about it." Sterling says something specific and unpleasant about most things. He does. A pause. "I'm going to call anyway." He called. The State Infrastructure Office said they would put in an inspection request and that the response time for non-emergency situations was 4 to 6 weeks. Thatcher said he was not certain this was non-emergency. The office said the protocol required a formal classification. He filed the paperwork for an expedited review. 4 to 6 weeks. Sterling Vance was the kind of man Oakhaven produced occasionally and then could not quite account for. Educated, sharp, aggrieved, the intelligence turned inward until it curdled into something more like accumulated resentment than wisdom. He had been on the town council for 11 years. He had been, in his youth, something else. She had heard stories from people who had known him as a young man, a different kind of energy, something that might have gone another direction under different circumstances, but that was a long time ago. Now he occupied the northeast corner house on Aldersgate with his wife, who had left him 4 years ago, and his rose bushes, which had not left him but declined to bloom, which, in Sterling's view, amounted to the same kind of betrayal. The roses were a variety called Compassion, a climbing rose, pale apricot, fragrant under the right conditions. Sterling had planted 5 of them 11 years ago when he moved into the house, and not one had bloomed in 4 seasons. He had amended the soil twice. He had pruned them correctly, or what the book said was correctly. He had fed them. They grew, green, healthy, increasingly infuriating in their health, in the specific way that things are most maddening when they are alive, but not yet what you need them to be. He had called animal control about the cat twice. Both times, the officer had taken the call, noted the complaint, and done nothing actionable. On a Wednesday in the 3rd week of October, Elowen was at the workbench with the magnifying lamp on the bureau's fullboard, actually working on it now, the consolidant applied, the inlay pressed flat with padded clamps, each clamp positioned by feel as much as sight, when she heard a commotion in the alley, a sharp sound. Sterling's voice raised. She went to the back door. Balthazar was at the base of the rosebush closest to Sterling's property line, which was, technically, just inside Elowen's alley, a complicated jurisdictional question that had previously gone unremarked, and he was digging. Not aggressive, excited digging, not play. Systematic, deliberate, working at one spot at the base of the nearest rose cane, both front paws moving in careful alternation. Sterling was standing 4 feet away, his face working through an expression that could not decide between anger and the particular helplessness of someone watching something happen to property they feel strongly about. "Get that thing away from my roses," he said, when he saw Elowen. "They're not your roses," she said carefully. "That bush is on my side." "The root system." "Balthazar," she said. The cat did not stop. He had uncovered something. She could see it from the doorway, a pale shape in the dark soil, roughly the size and shape of a man's fist. He worked around it with his front paws, not trying to move it, tracing its outline, removing the earth from around it, the way a restorer removes old finish, carefully, without haste, attending to the thing rather than the effort. Elowen came down the alley and crouched beside the hole. It was a rock, quartz, she thought, or something like it, angular, with one face that was sharply pointed, and it was sitting directly against the main root crown of the rose. Not resting against it, pressed into it over years as the root had grown and the soil had shifted, the sharp angle of it pressed into the root tissue which had grown around it in a visible callus, the wood compressed and discolored where the stone had been working against it. She looked up at Sterling. He was staring at the rock. She got her prying chisel from the workshop, a tool she used for separating joints, narrow and flat-headed, and she worked the stone loose from the soil. It came out with some resistance. The root where it had been was pale and compressed, but not severed. The surrounding wood looked intact. She put the stone in Sterling's hands. He stood there holding it. Balthazar sat back, shook the soil off both front paws one at a time with the brisk satisfaction of a job completed, and walked back to the workshop. Sterling looked at the rock. He looked at the rose. He looked at the alley where the cat had been. "That doesn't mean anything," he said, but his voice had gone quiet. "No," Elowen agreed. She went inside. 3 days later, the first of Sterling's compassion roses opened. A single blossom, pale apricot, slightly ragged at the edges, the way the first blossoms of roses that have not bloomed in years are always slightly ragged, as though the thing has been waiting so long it has almost forgotten the shape of what it is supposed to be. Elowen saw it from the alley, on her way to check the slope. She did not say anything to Sterling, but when she passed his house that afternoon, his call to animal control had not been renewed, and the order for the cat's capture had, as far as anyone could tell, quietly lapsed. November came early that year. The light changed first, the particular clarity of Shenandoah autumn gone, replaced by something lower and grayer, a sky that sat close to the hills like a lid pressed down. The rain continued, not in storms, but in accumulation, day after day of steady wet that the ground could no longer absorb. Puddles stayed. The creek at the south end of town ran higher than anyone had seen it in October, high enough that the footbridge planks were dark with moisture halfway up their grain. Elowen checked the slope every morning. The seam she had found was longer now, 6 inches, then 8. The thread of water had become a slow, consistent trickle. She had filled it twice more with packing cloths as a stopgap, knowing it was not a solution, watching the water find its way around them. Balthazar's mornings at the window had changed. He was no longer simply watching. He moved between the window and the back door, between the front of the workshop and the slope, in a pattern that had the quality of a route, as though he was conducting a circuit check, each position confirmed, and then the next. He ate less. He slept in shorter intervals. He had begun to sit with his ear pressed against the floor of the workshop, not moving for long minutes, the posture of something listening below the frequency of what anyone else could hear. "You're worried," she said to him one morning. He lifted his head from the floor and looked at her. She had called the State Infrastructure Office herself that week, a call which had gone to voicemail. She had called the Town Engineer's Office, which was unmanned on Tuesdays. She had sent an email, which received an automated reply. Thatcher was working the formal channels. She was working the other ones. Neither of them was getting traction. On the first Tuesday of November, Thatcher found her at the alley and said, "Come with me. I want to show you something." They drove his truck up the fire road that ran behind the ridge, a road that required a key to the gate at the bottom, a key that Thatcher still had from his years as sheriff. The retention basin was 3/4 of a mile up the road, set behind the main ridge in a broad cleared area, earthen walls in a horseshoe shape around a body of brown water that looked, in the November grey, like something old and very still. The water level was high. The inlet pipes at the upper end were running. The outlet pipe at the lower end was barely running at all. They stood at the base of the earthen wall on the downstream side. There was moisture on the face of the wall, not seeping. Elowen did not know the technical word, but she knew what she was looking at, water coming through material it should not be able to come through. The soil on the downstream face of the dam was dark and soft where it should have been firm and compacted. "How long?" she said. "I don't know." He was quiet for a moment. "This is what the seam on your slope is. The water is finding the path." Balthazar knew, she said. Thatcher didn't respond to that directly. "I'm going above the state office," he said. "There's a federal number. I'll use my old credentials. How much time do we have?" "I don't know that either. If there's another significant rain event before the inspection." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. They drove back down without speaking. The bare trees on either side of the fire road made a sound in the wind that was halfway between rattling and breathing. Ascites. The following weekend brought the first hard frost of the year. Elowen woke at 3 in the morning to a sound she had not heard before, a low, sustained sound from the workshop below. Not crying, not distress. The sound that a cat makes when it is trying to communicate something that does not have a feline equivalent and must be invented in the moment. She went downstairs. Balthazar was standing in the center of the workshop, not at the window, not at the door. In the center, he was looking up at the ceiling or at something beyond it, and the sound he was making was low and continuous and had a quality she could not name. Resonance was the closest she could get, a sound that vibrated the base of her own chest when she stood close enough. She stood in the doorway in her robe and her socks and looked at him. "I know," she said. He stopped. He looked at her. "I know," she said again. "I'm trying." He held her gaze for a long moment, and then he walked to the back door and sat there, facing it, facing the slope and the ridge beyond. He did not make the sound again, but he did not come back to the mat to sleep. He stayed at the door until morning, and when she got up at 6 and looked down the alley, the trickle on the slope had become, in the night, a run. A thin, steady stream, still small, still manageable, but no longer the same thing it had been. She called Thatcher at 6:15. "I see it," he said. He was already outside. "I've already called the federal line. They're coming Thursday." "Thursday," she said. "Thursday." She looked at the ridge. The frost had silvered the top of it, the bare branches catching the early light and throwing it back cold and white, and the sky above the ridge was the color of a bruise healing, not dark, not bright, somewhere in the difficult middle. The spring festival at the church was this Sunday. The whole town would be there. The whole town was always there. She looked at the stream on the slope. She looked at Balthazar, who was watching the ridge with all of his attention, both eyes, his clear one and his scarred one, fixed on the tree line as though he could see through it to the water wall beyond. "Thursday," she said again to herself, and went inside to get dressed. The spring festival at the Church of the Redeemer had been held on the first Sunday of November for 41 years, a tradition so embedded in Oak Haven's calendar that it functioned less like an event and more like a fixed point in the year, something the town organized itself around the way trees organize around a fence post, the growth conforming to the obstacle eventually becoming part of the shape. The festival filled the fellowship hall and the church sanctuary and spilled out onto the side lawn, weather permitting. This year, the weather did not permit. It had been raining since Thursday. The fellowship hall was a wide, low-ceilinged room attached to the south side of the sanctuary, connected by a glass-paned breezeway that leaked when the rain came sideways, which it was doing today. Tables ran along both long walls and down the center, potluck dishes, baked goods, the craft auction items wrapped in cellophane, the school children's artwork arranged on folding display boards that the wind from the doors made shudder and flex. The choir would sing at 4 o'clock. The children's pageant was at 3. The whole town would be there by 2. Elowen had not intended to bring the cat. She had walked to the church at noon to help with setup, because she was on the arrangement committee, a position she had occupied for 12 years by virtue of showing up reliably and not requiring anyone to manage her. Balthazar had been in the workshop when she left. She had latched the back door, checked the window catches, and walked up the street in her good wool coat, with the rain making her umbrella shudder. She had been in the fellowship hall for 40 minutes, arranging the craft table, when she heard a sound at the side door, the door that opened onto the covered walkway between the church building and the parking area. A low sound, brief, repeated. She set down the cellophane-wrapped quilt she was handling and walked to the side door and opened it. Balthazar was on the walkway, rein on his back, ears flat. She stared at him for a moment. He was not a cat that wandered. In the 6 weeks he had lived in the workshop, he had never gone further than the alley on his own. The church was 3 blocks from the workshop. He had never once shown any interest in the direction of the church. He looked at her with his clear eye and his scarred eye, and the expression she had come to read over 6 weeks, concentration, was there, but at an intensity she had not seen before. Focused, the way a tool is focused, the way a specific instrument brought to a specific task is focused. "How did you get out?" she said. He turned and looked up at the ridge. The church sat on a slight rise at the north end of Main Street, and from the covered walkway, the ridge was visible above the tree line. The bare November slope, rain dark, the top of it obscured by the low cloud that had settled over Oakhaven since Thursday. She heard the choir beginning to warm up inside. She heard voices, children, the particular sound of a community gathering in a space too small for it, noise building in layers the way water builds behind something that is holding. She looked at Balthazar. She looked at the ridge. "Stay here," she said. "I'll find somewhere to put you that's dry." She went inside and found Thatcher near the coffee urn, and she was about to speak when she stopped. His face, usually composed, had something in it she did not recognize. Not the settled calm he carried, but a tightness around the eyes, something held in check. "The inspection is Monday," he said before she could speak. He had seen something in her face too. "Balthazar followed me here," she said. He set down his coffee. He did not respond to that the way she expected. "I want to make a call," he said. "From the parking lot. I want better reception than I get in here." She nodded. She went to bring Balthazar inside. She found a spot for him in the small room off the breezeway that the custodian used for storage. Mops, folding chairs stacked against the wall, boxes of old bulletins, a broken floor lamp. She set him inside with a water bowl she found in the church kitchen and latched the door with the hook and eye catch. He could push through it if he wanted to, she knew that. But she needed him contained while she helped with the setup, and she told herself this would be enough. The room off the breezeway had a window that faced the ridge. She noticed this when she was closing the door. Balthazar was already at the window. Iaskas a frei noi. By 2:30, the fellowship hall was full. The rain on the metal roof made a continuous sound that the conversations inside had to compete with, and the conversations were winning, the noise level building until it filled every corner of the room. Laughter, children, the particular loud warmth of people who were temporarily very glad to be inside. The choir director was running a final rehearsal in the sanctuary. The potluck table was nearly full. Sterling Vance was standing near the baked goods with a piece of coffee cake, speaking to no one in particular, which was his usual posture at community events, present, observing, maintaining the option to comment. Elowen moved through the room. She spoke to people she knew, which was everyone, and found herself moving toward the windows on the north wall, the windows that faced the ridge, without entirely deciding to. The cloud over the ridge had dropped further. She could no longer see the top of the slope. The tree line was a dark, ragged edge below a solid grey wall, and the wall was moving. Not visibly moving, not rapidly, but she had the sense of it pressing down, the way weather presses down before it does something irreversible. She found Thatcher at her elbow. "The inspector called," he said quietly. "He's not coming Monday. He rescheduled to Wednesday." She looked at him. "Another week," he said. "Another week of this rain." She looked at the ridge. "We should say something," she said. "To the council. To someone." "On what basis?" He said it without bitterness. "Just the fact of it. Without the inspection report, I have one retired sheriff and a woman who found a wet patch on her slope. Sterling will—" "Sterling," she said, and she looked across the room at him, standing with his coffee cake and his quiet grievances, and she thought, Sterling's rose bloomed. Sterling did not call animal control again. Something shifted in Sterling, some small gear, and it has not shifted back. "Let me try," she said. Thatcher looked at her. "Try what?" "I don't know yet," she said honestly, and crossed the room. She had never spoken to Sterling directly about anything beyond what was required by proximity and shared civic membership. They had not been unfriendly exactly. They had been the particular kind of careful that people are when they occupy the same small world and have long since assessed each other without conclusion. "Sterling," she said. He looked at her. "The retention basin," she said. No preamble. She did not have time for preamble, or she had decided not to use the time she had on it. "Thatcher's been filing for an inspection since October. The inspector just pushed to Wednesday. The downstream face is seeping. My slope has been running water for 6 weeks. He looked at her without speaking. "I know what you're going to say," she said. "That there's no official classification. That the protocol requires—" "I wasn't going to say that," Sterling said. She stopped. He looked into his coffee cake for a moment. "The rosebush bloomed," he said. He said it quietly, not to her specifically. "I know. The cat found that stone." He said it the way people say things they have been turning over for weeks, getting it out at last. He wasn't playing. He knew it was there. He's been sitting at my slope every morning, she said, listening to the ground. Sterling was quiet. He came here today, she said, from the workshop, on his own, 3 blocks in the rain. Sterling looked at the north windows, at the ridge behind the glass and the cloud. I'm not in a position to authorize an emergency classification, he said. Not without the engineering report. I know. But the parking lot, he said slowly. The church parking lot. The town code requires us to clear it during any event where attendance exceeds 150. She waited. If I were to announce, casually, not in any official capacity, that the parking situation required everyone to move to their vehicles for a brief relocation, that would not be a council action. It would be a courtesy notice, and it would require people to go outside. She looked at him. Which would put them in the parking lot, he said. Which is in the open, away from the building. She said nothing. He had not quite done it yet. He was at the edge of it. The fire road gate key, he said. Does Thatcher still have it? Yes. Then he might want to be outside when the courtesy notice happens, Sterling said. With the ability to make a call. He set down his coffee cake and moved toward the small podium at the front of the room where the council announcements were traditionally made. What happened in the next 14 minutes was not orderly. It was not precisely what Sterling had described either. Elowen would understand later, working backward through it, that the sequence had its own logic, but in the middle of it, the logic was not visible, only the events themselves, one inside the next. Sterling reached the podium. He was 3 sentences into his parking announcement, courteous, bureaucratic, technically accurate, when the sound began. It came from the direction of the storage room off the breezeway. Low at first, then not low. A sustained, resonant sound, the sound Balthazar made when language was not sufficient and he had to find another register. And in the fellowship hall, full of voices, it cut through the way a specific frequency cuts through noise, not by being louder than everything else, but by being different from everything else, a tone that did not belong in the room and that the human ear, without instruction, understood as alarm. Several people moved toward the sound. Several people moved away from it. A child near the front wall began to cry, not from the sound, but from the sudden movement of adults around her. And then the door to the storage room opened, not violently. Balthazar pushed it with both front paws at the latch, the hook and eye gave, and he came into the breezeway at a run, not panicked, running with direction, the way an animal runs when it knows exactly where it is going. He came into the fellowship hall and did not stop. He went to the central table and knocked the nearest casserole dish from its trivet with one sweep of his front legs. It hit the floor with a sound that stopped everything. In the silence, he ran to the nearest window and hit it with both paws once. He ran to the side door, the door onto the covered walkway, and hit it with both paws twice. The room was very still. Thatcher was at the side door before anyone else. He opened it. Balthazar went through it, stopped on the walkway, turned, and looked back into the room. Everyone outside, Thatcher said. He did not use his official voice, the voice he had used for 22 years, because this was not an official situation. He used the other voice, the older one, the one that did not explain itself. Now, through this door, leave your coats. Nobody asked why. That was the thing she would remember afterward. In a room of 200 people, nobody asked why. The voice and the cat and the moment had assembled into something beyond argument, and the people of Oakhaven filed through the side door, onto the covered walkway, and into the parking lot, not quite running, moving with the hurried seriousness of a group that has decided collectively and without discussion that the person who is speaking is correct. She went last with Sterling behind her. She was on the walkway when she heard it. It was not a sound. It was the ground, a vibration she felt in the soles of her shoes first, then in her knees, then in her chest, a deep, slow movement, the kind of movement that belongs not to events, but to terrain, to land deciding to become something other than what it has been. She stopped. Sterling stopped behind her. She gripped the walkway railing. The sound came a second later. Not the crash she had expected, not a single event, but a sequence, a long, grinding percussion that built and did not peak so much as spread, widening through the ground beneath them like a wave, moving through something too solid for waves. On the ridge, through the rain and the low cloud, Something large and dark moved in the tree line. The trees at the top of the eastern slope leaned, and then leaned further, and then were not trees anymore in the way they had been. They were part of the movement, part of the long grey mass of earth and water that had been waiting for months for the moment when the slope could no longer hold the weight of the sky it had absorbed. The slide took the fire road. It took the upper alley behind the east side of Main Street. It took the delivery bay of the hardware store at its far edge. It stopped 30 feet short of the workshop. 30 feet. She stood in the church parking lot in the rain with 200 people from Oakhaven, and they were all outside, all of them, every one of them who had been in that room, and nobody was hurt. Nobody was hurt. She found Balthazar in the confusion, which was itself a kind of miracle. A parking lot full of frightened people and the cat in the middle of it, not hiding, not running, just sitting on the concrete near the walkway steps. His fur was soaked through. He was listing slightly to his left, a lean she had not seen before, and when she crouched beside him and put her hand on his back, she felt him breathing too rapidly. She picked him up. He did not resist. He settled against her chest with the fullness of something that has finished what it came to do and has no further instructions. "I have you," she said. "I have you." He pressed his face against the front of her wool coat. Thatcher was behind her. He had his phone out, had already made the calls that needed to be made. He looked at the cat in her arms and then at Elowen. "Take him to Dr. Purvis," he said. Dr. Purvis was the veterinarian 2 streets over, a Sunday, but Thatcher was already dialing. "I'll call ahead." "Go," Sterling said from somewhere behind Thatcher. "Yeah, go. We'll manage here." She went. Dr. Purvis met her at the back door of the clinic, coat over his pajamas, and he took Balthazar from her without ceremony and carried him to the examination room and did not ask her to wait outside. She stood near the door while he worked, not in his way, not speaking. The cat lay on the table without fighting any of it, the examination, the initial treatment, the careful hands, and she understood that the absence of resistance was itself information, not a good sign. There were fragments of glass in his left hindquarter, small ones from the window he had struck. There was bruising over his ribs from the casserole impact she had not seen. He had hit the table hard when he swept the dish, and she had not seen him falter. His inner ears, Dr. Purvis explained, were the primary concern. The pressure of the slide, the concussive percussion of it, had propagated through the ground and through the building, and for an animal whose primary sense had been his listening, his ability to hear what human ears could not. The cumulative trauma to his hearing had been severe. "He may not recover his hearing fully," Dr. Purvis said. "Based on what I'm seeing, I think it's likely he will lose most or all of it." Elowen looked at Balthazar on the table. He was looking at her, not at the room, not at the doctor. At her. "He'll need monitoring," Dr. Purvis said. "A few days here if you're willing, and then he'll need a quiet home. A stable home. An inside home." She reached out and put 2 fingers against the side of Balthazar's jaw, along the scar. He pressed into them. "He has that," she said. The days that followed moved slowly and quietly, the way the days after something large always do, the event itself vivid, dense with meaning, and then the aftermath thin and grey by comparison, the world having to reconstitute itself around the new fact of what happened. The town held meetings. The engineering report, expedited now, confirmed what Thatcher had filed for months. The basin had been failing at a rate that would have become catastrophic within weeks, possibly sooner, under the continued rainfall. The dam was condemned. Federal emergency funds were applied for. The alley behind Main Street would require months of work. Gerald Moss's delivery bay was a loss. No one in Oakhaven had been hurt. Sterling said this at the council meeting, standing at the podium with his hands flat on the table. He said it without flourish, without preamble, with the plain weight of a fact that required no enhancement. Then he said, "I want to revisit the town's policy on feral and stray animals, specifically the classification system. I think we've been drawing lines in the wrong places." Nobody objected. It was that kind of meeting. Thatcher called his daughter in Charlottesville that week and told her about the tremor, told her completely, without managing what he said or how much of it he gave her. She drove up on Saturday. She sat with him in the wide porched house for most of the afternoon, and when she left, she asked if she could come back the following weekend. He said yes. He stood on the porch and watched her car go and did not feel, as he had feared he would feel, diminished. He felt, instead, something like the first thaw after a long winter. The ground not soft yet, not yielding, but the quality of the cold changed, something released from its position, something moving. XO. Balthazar came home on a Wednesday, 5 days after the festival. He walked into the workshop on his own, carried in under her arm, and then sat down at the threshold, and he stood for a moment and assessed the room the way he had assessed it the first time, methodically, his good eye moving from point to point along the walls. The drop cloth was gone from the bureau. She had removed it the morning after the slide, in the first light of the early winter morning, and she had not put it back. The bureau stood open to the room, the fallboard lowered, the satinwood inlay visible, the hairline crack she had consolidated and pressed flat invisible now to anyone without a loop. She had worked on it for 3 hours that morning and would work on it again this afternoon. The magnifying lamp was positioned at the correct angle. The padded clamps were laid out in order on the bench beside it. He walked to the bureau and sat beside it, the same spot where he had sat weeks ago, watching her hands. He sat in that spot and he looked at the fallboard, and then he looked at her. "I know," she said. "I'm finishing it." He was deaf now. He had heard nothing since the slope came down. She knew he could not hear her. She said it anyway. He turned to face the window. Outside, the alley was changed. The slope that had run with water all autumn was different now. The slide had restructured it, the earth resettled, the broken debris of what had been there now graded and cleared by the emergency crews, and the new surface of the slope was pale and raw, exposed soil, waiting for the season to decide what to do with it. In spring, she thought, something would grow there. Something would find the raw ground and decide it was good. The ridge above it was clear for the first time in weeks. The cloud had lifted. The bare trees on the slope stood in the December light, which was thin and cold and direct, the light of a season that has stopped pretending. The sky above the ridge was the particular blue of winter, not the soft blue of other seasons, but something harder, cleaner, a blue that had been stripped of everything inessential. Balthazar looked at the ridge for a long time. His tail moved, once slowly. She went to the bench and began to work. The month turned. The light on the fallboard changed through the morning as she worked. First, the cold, direct light of early winter coming through the east window, then the softer, warmer quality of the midday sun as it moved around. She had ordered a second magnifying loupe, a better one, higher magnification, and she used it and the lamp together, close and patient, her hands doing what they had always known how to do, the knowledge in them older than the uncertainty in her eyes. The satinwood was beautiful under the loupe. The grain of it was a warm gold with a subtle figure, a slight chatoyance that moved when the light moved, and the banding that surrounded it was strung in a pattern she recognized as quintessentially federal, restrained and precise, the geometry of people who trusted the wood to be beautiful without help. The crack was gone. Not hidden, genuinely repaired, the consolidant and the pressure having restored the inlay to something close to its original flat. Close enough. She worked through the morning. Balthazar moved between the mat and the window and the spot beside the bureau, a circuit that had its own rhythm. He could not hear the scratch of her tools or the small sounds the wood made when she cleaned its surface, but he watched her work. He watched with the same attention he had always brought to it, the attention of something that found the observation itself worthwhile, not for what it was watching for, but for the act of watching. At noon, she put the tools down and made tea and stood at the window with her mug and looked out at the ridge. She called the museum in Richmond that afternoon. "The bureau is ready," she said. There was a pause on the other end. The director, who had called her twice and had twice been told she was being thorough, was a man who had learned not to express surprise on the telephone. "I'll send the transport team," he said. "This week, if it suits you." "Thursday suits me," she said. She hung up and stood in the workshop and looked at the bureau. It was a beautiful piece. It had always been a beautiful piece, even under the grime and the wear and the old repairs that previous restorers had added over 2 centuries, each of them leaving their own small signature in the wood. She had cleaned those away, most of them, and what was left was closer to the original. Not perfectly original, that was impossible, but honest. Honest about what it was and what it had been through. She put her hand on the fallboard. "Thursday," she said to the room. Balthazar looked up from the mat. "What vi say, di say." On the morning the transport team came, she woke early. The light through the east window was still grey when she came downstairs, the sun not yet above the ridge. Balthazar was already at his window. She stood in the doorway with her coffee and watched him watch the street in the thin, early light, the way he had watched it from the first day, patient, attentive, doing the work of watching with his whole body. The ridge above the tree line caught the first light before the street did. She watched it happen, the colour rising from grey to gold along the top of the slope, the bare branches of the hickory and oak lit from behind, and then the sun came fully over and the light changed the quality of everything, the workshop walls, the grain of the bureau, the scarred face of the cat at the window. The light hit Balthazar across his back and his side, and she saw it clearly for the first time. She had seen it before, had seen, in the weeks since Dr. Purvis gave him his initial bath and treatments, that the grey she had always seen was not what it appeared, but she had not seen it in morning light, in the particular cold, clear light of a winter morning, in the light that showed everything at the correct angle. He was not grey. The coat she had thought was grey, the dull, flat ash colour that had made him look damaged and used and unwanted at the corner, was not that at all. It had been that. Months on the street had compressed the fur with grime, with oil, with the accumulated residue of a life managed entirely outside, and what the grime had produced was a colour that was no colour at all, a negation of colour, a coat that said nothing about what was underneath. What was underneath was fire. She saw it now, in the December morning light, white and gold, the gold coming through in patches across his shoulders and his flank, warm and deep in the places the sun reached it, and beneath the gold, a pale white that was not the white of erasure, but the white of something vivid, against which the colour could be understood. A calico, the vet had said, in the technical sense. A fire calico, which was the unofficial term for the specific combination of colours, the warm golds and creams on white, which was rare in a male cat and which she had looked up later, in the particular way she looked things up when she needed to understand them fully. A genetic rarity, a combination that required the right conditions to appear. She had named him on the third day, before she knew what he was. She stood at the window with her coffee and looked at the light on his coat and thought, "You named him right." The gold moved across his back as he shifted, a small adjustment of his weight, turning slightly toward the ridge, and the patches of warm colour moved with him, rearranging themselves into a new pattern, still his, still recognizably his, the same cat who had sat at the corner for 9 days in the grey cold of October, the same cat who had stuffed wool cloths into a fissure in the earth with the patient desperation of someone trying to stop a thing that was going to happen anyway, who had pressed his body against a sleeping man to keep his heart beating through a cold night, who had dug in Sterling's garden with the careful attention of a surgeon, who had run through a fellowship hall full of people and broken a casserole dish and opened a door, who had listened to the earth with his whole body and understood what the earth was saying long before any human instrument had been brought to confirm it. He had not changed. The light had changed. The grime was gone, and the light was right, and what had been there all along was now visible. She set her coffee mug down on the sill. He did not hear the mug. He did not hear anything. He had lost that the way some things are lost, not in a moment, but as a consequence, one thing taken in the process of giving something else. She would learn this world with him. She was already learning it. She had begun to understand that he oriented now by light and vibration, and the particular warmth that came through glass in the morning, that he knew when she entered a room by the change in the air and the vibration of her footstep, that he had recalibrated, as he had always recalibrated, without apology and without drama. She watched him watch the ridge. The transport team would be here at 10. The Bureau would go to Richmond, to the museum, to the controlled climate and the glass case and the careful lighting that would show the satinwood inlay to people who had never heard of Oakhaven, who did not know about the slope or the dam or the November Sunday when 200 people walked out of a building 3 minutes before the ground changed. The Bureau would go and she would have the bench back, and the corner of the workshop where it had stood would be empty for a while, and then there would be something else. There was always something else. 31 years had taught her that. The ridge caught more light. The bare slope, still raw from the slide, was silver-white in the winter morning, and the sky above it was the hard winter blue, and the hickory trees along the undamaged part of the ridge were making the sound they made when there was no wind. No sound at all, a stillness so complete it was its own sound. Balthazar's tail hung loose over the edge of the windowsill. He watched the ridge, and the ridge held the morning light, and the workshop around them was warm and quiet, and full of the smell of wood and old glue and the cedar block she kept on the shelf above the tools, and neither of them needed anything to be different from what it was.